Humphreys, survivor, advocate, author, speaker, researcher, ambassador, and a seasoned former first responder. Supported by the team at Media 8, Off the Cuff with Kel is about growth and healing, leadership through trauma, awareness and understanding. We bring you compelling stories of courage, transformation and expert insights, along with candid discussions on the challenges victims and survivors face. Off the Cuff with Kel celebrates our shared humanity, blending deep vulnerability with humour. Each episode is crafted with love, honesty, and the emotions that bind us, whether it's laughter or tears, promoting resilience and hope. Please note, some of the discussions we have can be hard to hear and include sexual abuse themes, online exploitation, domestic and family violence, and trauma. So, listener discretion is advised. Please join us as we change the world one story at a time, embracing courage through vulnerability. All right, welcome guys to Off the Cuff with Kel. We are at episode number 27. I can count, we had to figure that out beforehand. I'm a little discombobulated tonight, but you know how we roll, with a little bit of fun and humor amongst the chaos and craziness. I have two of the most amazing women with me tonight, so I'm very, very pleased to welcome Melinda Tankard Reist and Maha Melhem to our amazing Off the Cuff with Kel podcast tonight. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Kelly.
Great.
Thank you. And you guys, yes, I got to hang out with your lovely selves in Melbourne and freeze my bits off. But the coffee was amazing, I must say, when in Melbourne. I certainly had a very interesting few days with my team, and not that either of you are from Melbourne, but just by chance got to catch up, and I'm just so excited for not just this podcast, but we had some amazing conversations, and I just want to thank you both for that. But moving forward, I can't wait to see, and you know, with all honesty, I can't wait to see what happens with this collaboration of minds and passion and purpose. So I just want to thank you both for that. But because of your work as well, I just want to acknowledge both of you. So it's probably better if you introduce yourself, but I'm going to try. Melinda is an amazing journalist, author of 7 books, one on the way that I know of, and probably 10,000 more that are forthcoming. But she's also the CEO, co-CEO of Collective Shout. I get that wrong?
Co-founder, movement director of Collective Shout. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I don't want to see you go, Melinda. Tell us all about what you do.
You're right, Kelly. Well, I co-founded the movement 15 years ago with some like-minded women to address the objectification of women, sexualisation of girls, harms of porn culture, trafficking, sex industry, and violence against women, and draw the intersections between all of those things. I also am a speaker and speak in schools regularly. And yes, I'm allegedly working on the next book.
I know writing's a bit of a mission. I'm still trying to do my second one, and all my followers are like, "Where the hell is it?" It's still been 5 years, so I will get there, guys. Yes. Oh, that would be great, because you know I need to get it finished. And we've got the amazing Maha Melhem. Now, the reason I connected with Maha was because of her extremely amazing legal prowess, but her amazing skill and just her passion working with the Royal Commission. And just from talking to Maha, her passion in this space is just, she's just a beautiful soul, a hardworking soul, has come so far in her journey. And, you know, due to that, she's formed her own legal consulting business and working with schools and organizations to change the way that they work with children and families. And I just think that's just so amazing. So if I've missed something, I'm sure there's a lot more there. Yeah. Well, what I think is really interesting, and there was a real gap. There's a real gap with schools and young people and their response to harmful sexual behaviours and things like sextortion and stuff like that. And I put an abstract recently in, and for many of you know that I've spoken previously at the conference called the Trauma Aware Schools Conference. And so I submitted an abstract about these harmful sexual behaviours and, you know, to give some sort of an idea on how to respond to what's kind of going on in the school. And then I see this post pop up that Maha and Melinda are like head to head tackling this issue and actually having conversations about this in schools. And so I was just like, I need to talk to these guys because it's such a big thing at the moment. Our young people are dying. Our young people are killing themselves. Our young people are stuck in situations that realistically, I don't think I even, you know, I mean, I want to say that I'm 21, but I know this is a young face. But I never had to deal with that. And, you know, I'm in my early 40s, but I don't ever remember it being so complicated. And I really feel for our young people and the scope of what is confronting them at the moment. So I'd love to hand over to both of you to just maybe give us a bit more of a picture of what we're sort of dealing with right now and what's happening to our young people.
Yes, Kelly, it's a dire situation, and the stories are getting worse, the stories from girls, and they're getting worse younger. So girls are routinely experiencing sexual harassment, sexual intimidation. They're being touched, they're being groped, they're being threatened with rape if they don't send nudes. They are being sent unsolicited dick pics, even underage girls. And one of the largest phenomenon is sexual groaning and moaning. So girls being subjected to sexual grunting, groaning, moaning noises in the classroom, in the schoolyard, on the bus, at the school camp. And this is life for them. They think they have to endure this. They have to put up with it. It's become such a normal experience for them. I have very young girls crying, saying that they don't feel safe at school. I have girls telling me that older boys have taught younger boys to make these noises anytime they see a girl. So they're making these noises even at home. So there's no respite even at home. I have young women of color telling me that boys tell them that they are their dirty little sex slaves. Asian girls, for example, are routinely subjected to racist tropes. I have also young lesbian girls telling me that boys say to them, we're going to rape you straight, or inviting them to join in threesomes with them. And, girls should be able to go to school to learn, to socialize with their friends. Instead, they are being subjected to routine sexual intrusion, sexual intimidation, sexual harassment, and the same for female teachers. So I've had more female teachers this year telling me they are leaving the profession because of what they are subjected to. Young female teachers, 3 this year, telling me that they did not go into teaching to face sexual harassment, being propositioned, being subjected to rape, so-called jokes, and they are leaving the profession en masse. We are going to lose more good female teachers because of the entrenched sexually harassing behaviours, the sexual aggression that female students and female teachers are experiencing in every school in this country, without exception, every day.
And I'd add to that, when Linda's been speaking with students across the country, she's spoken to thousands of students. I don't believe anyone has that evidence base that she has of direct accounts from children and young people of what they're experiencing. And this is really important because harmful sexual behaviour, the data on that is quite hard to capture, because we're talking about a continuum of problematic to abusive behaviours that are not necessarily captured in criminal recording or records of offences that are charged or prosecuted. But even with that being the case, we do know a few things. As you will know, the Australian Child Maltreatment Study recently published came out of one of the recommendations of the Royal Commission to do a prevalence study. I mean, and that's shown us that over 28% of Australians have experienced child sexual abuse. But what we now know is that the rate of child sexual abuse by adults has been decreasing, while the rate of child sexual abuse by other children and young people has been increasing. And in fact, that category of child sexual abuse by another known child or adolescent is by far the single largest category we have now of offending against children. And we also know that, adolescent males have previously been identified as a cohort with the highest rate of sexual offending. And we also know that girls are about 2.4 times more likely to be the victims of child sexual abuse. So we have, even though the data on harmful sexual behaviours is a little bit tricky to get a hold of, we do have some information. And then what we're hearing from Melinda is quite jaw-dropping, really. And it's all pointing to a pretty, as Melinda says, a pretty dire picture.
Yeah, I find it concerning that 28.5% is only what we know, right? So that's the reported stats. So what don't we know is the looming question in my head. But even more than that, the normalization of what we're seeing and the language that young boys are using. And look, it's not just I want to say it's not just young boys, and young women are not the only victims. Young boys are victims as well. But in proportion to young girls is a massive, massive difference. So, I think all our young people are at risk of this. Would you say it's a culture, or is this just it is culture, right? How do we change a culture like this? It's just...
Well, a sexist culture is grooming sexist boys. We cannot talk about consent and respectful relationships if we don't address the culture which is normalizing sexual aggression, harmful sexual behaviours. Pornography is now identified by our watch. It's identified in our national plan to address violence against women and children as fueling attitudes which drive sexual violence against women. That's now identified in the global literature. Some of us were saying this quite a long time ago and were mocked and derided and made fun of, and now it's in the highest documents in the land. So boys are routinely consuming hardcore violent porn. They're consuming incest porn, rape, torture, sadism, extreme debasement and degradation of women, and they think this is normal. A female teacher told me last year she overheard two 12-year-old boys talking about sex, and one boy asked the other boy, "How do you know when you're having sex?" And the second boy replied, "When she starts to cry." This is what they think is normal sexuality. I have girls in schools tell me boys want to choke and strangle them. This is not normal behavior. This is socialized, learned, taught behavior where boys are acting out on girls, including now in primary school. Rates of child-on-child sexual assault through the roof at levels never before seen in Australia and globally as well. And I do acknowledge some of this content may be triggering, and I acknowledge Indiana's comment as well. In Indiana, I'm sorry that this has happened to you. So we are going to see more cruelty, more sexism, more sexual harassment, more sexual assault, more rape, more violence as a result of pornography. Pornography is the biggest department of education in the world. It is deforming the developing sexual templates of our young people. This is a giant experiment never before carried out on the healthy sexual development of our young people. And we are seeing the results of that now playing out in schools around the country, around the world, and it is only going to get worse if we don't address it as a matter of urgency. This is a public health crisis.
100%. I think when the Australian Child Maltreatment Study came out, at least they acknowledged, or the World Health Organization finally acknowledged, that this was an epidemic and not just, a situation or, this a trend or something like that. This is, and I know as a survivor myself, I have a few little health issues, but anyone that I've spoken to who is a child sexual abuse survivor has got some form of trouble later in life due to the trauma and the stress of holding on to and surviving through childhood sexual abuse. And so I think that without addressing this, we're actually setting ourselves up as a government and as a nation for complete failure.
We are, and schools have become sites of abuse. Schools have a duty of care towards their students and their teachers, but the schools are now sites of trauma and abuse, and a lot of girls don't want to go to school anymore. Why would you want to go? There's a reason for the rise in absenteeism and school refusal. It's no real mystery.
No, 100%. I'm very interested in the nexus between these young boys and learning from pornography, and then growing and developing into young men who have relationships with women, and the connection between that and domestic and family violence, which is something, as a police officer for 16 years, I have seen time and time again, particularly coercively controlling relationships where these behaviors are so subtle sometimes that these women do not even recognize what's happening until they're stuck. Yes. And they're being sexually abused or harmed or raped, or marital rape is something not very heavily spoken about at all. It feels like a sense of entitlement, part of the job, right?
Yep.
And so normalized that it almost, it's not labeled as domestic violence for some until they, end up hurt and at a police station and needing help, and finally it's explained, and then they find it so difficult to get out of. So this element of coercive control and gaslighting.
Yeah.
Well, I think that sort of speaks to Melinda's point about the normalization of all of this, and what you're saying there too, Kelly. We do know that it is something that, because of our socialization, of children, young people's socialization through porn and other ways, they're coming to accept this as normal. Girls are finding it harder to identify that they don't need to, they shouldn't accept this. Even adults, perhaps even teachers or other professionals who children might look up to, may not recognize it, may minimize it as well. And also, I think there's a little bit of perhaps there's sometimes a difficulty in identifying a behavior as problematic. It may seem sort of minor, but what we need to understand is that this is a continuum of behaviors, and children, young people, if this is sort of unchecked, how far down that trajectory do we go? And I think you're right to point to our record of gender-based violence in Australia now and in adulthood. Where do we think these young boys, these young men are going to go? What's their trajectory if this is normalized now?
The best example I can give, Kelly, of the link between porn and domestic violence was actually a letter I received from a woman by the name of Di McLeod, who was the director of the Centre for Sexual Assault. Di? Yeah, on the Gold Coast. And she wrote to me after I appeared on television discussing porn and violence against women, and she said to me that what she had noticed was an increase in sexual violence in women aged 14 to 80 plus. And she said the defining common denominator was that they were all victims of porn-inspired abuse. So the signature acts of pornography were inflicted on girls as young as 14 and women as old as 80. And she mentioned torture, drugging, filming without consent, bondage, choking and strangulation. In Brisbane, a domestic violence service was established only to deal with the victims of strangulation, because the regular DV services could not manage the number of victims coming in with strangulation injuries, which is a red flag for homicide, of course.
Yes,
so
100%.
You can see this nexus between the scenes most popular in pornography, the genres of pornography, and what is being carried out on, inflicted upon real, women and girls.
I want to do two things. I want just to sort of backtrack briefly and I really want to define what harmful sexual behaviors are. But I just have another thought, just really briefly, around this strangulation. I was very much a specialist in terms of domestic violence during my service, and the thing that I'm going to right now is how dangerous strangulation is, and I don't think any young person really understands that, and I really do believe there needs to be more education around the risks on strangulation. And for those who don't know, it's literally seconds before brain damage can occur, and someone who's been strangled to the point where oxygen is cut off, if left unattended, or something's happened and they pass out as a result of that strangulation, there can actually be brain bleeds, and it can cause death. And that's where some of these homicides do occur, from strangulation and not understanding the risks, so thinking that it's normal, thinking that that's what that woman wants. She doesn't want to be fucking strangled. Like, nobody wants to be strangled, okay? And that's the thing. The normalization is very concerning, but I think for these young people, understanding the seriousness of some of these behaviors,
yes,
and the that it is domestic violence, that it's unacceptable, and then the actual risks of harm to somebody as a result of those actions is so misunderstood.
Yes.
When they do have engagement with police, they don't think they've done anything wrong.
No.
Like, how can you not understand?
Anal fissures is another one. I spoke to a GP who said she was treating more teenage girls with anal fissures, sometimes from group anal sex. And in one case, the doctor told me that the girl had ended up with a colostomy bag. I mean, they're not warned of this. They're not warned that this is where you might end up. But girls are taught to think, they're indoctrinated too in porn culture, to think these acts are sexy, and if you're a hot girl, you won't say no. If you want to be hot, if you want to be popular, you will do what the boys want. And the boys have learned this. I mean, they have learned entitlement on steroids. In the manosphere, the Andrew Tate et al.'s teaching them that women should please you and be submissive to your every whim and your every desire. And so girls think they're supposed to enjoy this. They think there's something wrong with them if they don't want to be choked and strangled and left gagging and have ejaculate, running down their faces. They think there's something wrong with them, rather than recognizing there's something wrong with a porn-soaked, saturated culture, which is grooming boys to treat girls in these ways. But instead, they blame themselves for not being, liberated and empowered and sex positive enough to want to, enjoy their own pain, having pain inflicted on them. Girls that I speak to don't expect to enjoy sex. They talk about expecting pain, but, as long as he gets off, that's the main thing. As long as he has a good time. They have no sense of their own pleasure or enjoyment. We're now seeing a rise of something called boy sober. It's a trending hashtag called boy sober, where more women and girls are saying, we're done. They're turning away from dating apps. Dating apps are going into decline because women have just, had enough of mistreatment by, inadequate, poorly formed, unrealized men, men with no regard to them, no empathy, just taking and expecting women to do what they want, and seeing women in terms of conquest rather than relationship, mutuality, authentic, human connection. Anyway, I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent. I don't even remember the original question, but it was very, very good, Kelly. Maha could probably bring us back into line.
Yeah, well, we're talking about, but no, it's all related
Oh, good.
to the question. You're asking about what are harmful sexual behaviours.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, generally, like as a broad brush, they're behaviours that would fall outside of what we would consider developmentally expected, or sort of appropriate. They're what we the way we describe them is as a part of a continuum, on a continuum of sexual behaviours that range from inappropriate to problematic to abusive. And actually, Leah Bromfield and Amanda Patton from the Australian Centre for Child Protection have done some great work to explain that continuum, and going along from, as I said, from inappropriate, problematic, abusive. But generally, they're behaviours that are going to be problematic to the child's own development. They're going to be coercive, sexually aggressive, or predatory towards others, and they're increasing in seriousness to the point of serious child sexual abuse.
Yeah, I just thought it was really important to go back and define that. I mean, I've talked somewhat about harmful sexual behaviours, but not on the continuum of it stretching into pornographic behaviours where, children are engaging and watching in adult pornography, which we know at times is obviously consensual, but sometimes it is obviously coerced and forced, and those women on pornography sites are not there consensually. So it's a real misrepresentation, as we know, of what is real, and it's very misleading for our young people to have their sex education off pornography sites. And I think I read a statistic, it was something like only 54-ish, or maybe less than half, just under half of parents have had any kind of conversation with their child about pornography and what it means, or to give it any kind of context. And I think that's really distressing. I really do, because in lieu of not having a conversation with your child about healthy sexual relationships, where are they finding their information?
Well, yeah, pornography has become our most prominent sex educator. I wonder if we can take the comment there from Holly-Ann Martin. Holly-Ann's doing some excellent work particularly in our Indigenous communities and child protective behaviours, body safety. Holly-Ann makes the point that many principals are still not dealing with children exhibiting harmful sexual behaviours. I've seen this as well. Some schools really are trying, but they're actually overwhelmed. Teachers are already struggling. It's already hard to be a teacher, and a lot of complexities now with children with mental health issues and increasingly neurodiverse kids. We're seeing children coming in from trauma experiences already before they even come to school. So much pressure on teachers, but the fact is that schools do have a duty of care to provide a safe educational environment, and they are civilly and in some jurisdictions criminally liable for not reporting these behaviours, and Maha can speak to more of the legal side of that. I've seen schools where there's complete denial that these behaviours are even happening. I've seen schools that don't believe these behaviours are happening at all until they sit in on one of my classes, and I ask girls, how many of you experience sexual harassment? How many of you are subjected to sexual groaning, grunting noises? And all the hands go up, even the little kids' hands, grade 4, 5, 6, the hands go up. The number of girls pressured to send nudes, the number of girls who have been subjected to body judgment, where the boys are ranking girls' bodies on the basis of how similar they are to a porn star. The whole production of so-called deep fakes, nudes, where boys have become self-appointed porn producers, and they're producing porn based on their own peers, where they've scraped an image of the girl from her social media page, her profile, and put that on a naked body and created explicit imagery that they're sharing around. These things are happening in schools. Some principals are wanting to deal with it, and that's why Maha and I have been asked to come in and address school leaders. I provide the data, the experience that the girls have shared with me, and also what the research is saying globally. And then Maha provides the legal response, the regulatory framework, the mandatory reporting, the state, federal laws, Office of the Children's Guardian, Royal Commission, because we realise schools are desperate, they need help, and that's why we've created this new offering. Maha, do you want to say something more to the legal side of what we are delivering?
Yeah, I think it's the law is still evolving in this space, and it's not crystal clear, but it's important to remember that a lot of these behaviours, not all of them, but a lot of the behaviours that we're talking about, if they were engaged in by adults, would clearly be criminal. We would recognise them pretty quickly as criminal offences. The complexity here is that when we're talking about children engaging in these behaviours, and this is why we are talking about children, and the language that's used usually is harmful sexual behaviours, it's important to remember that these are children and young people, that as a society, we, the adults, the grown-ups in this society, have responsibility, not only for protecting vulnerable children, young people, but also for educating all children and young people and those who are engaging in these behaviours. If we want to have the discussion, and which we are nationally, and we should, about the age of criminal responsibility and keeping that down, we also need to be talking to children and young people about conduct which may be criminal and which could lead to serious consequences for them. No one wants to see a child or a young person on a path towards criminalisation. But so we're not serving the children who are engaging in these behaviours well by ignoring or minimising the problem. We're not, it's not that we're just not protecting the children who are the victims. We're not serving those children who are engaging in these behaviours well.
I think you just said something that's really significant, because I've just written down here dismissal of the children doing this because, they're just kids, that whole just undermining the serious nature of, even letting it go once is, kind of one thing, let's see what happens, but to let it continue, knowing that, it's not okay.
That's right.
Is formulating a pattern of behaviour which formulates who they become. The unaddressed behaviour in children becomes unaddressed behaviour in adults. Is really that.
Well, I have girls in year 10, 11, 12 telling me they're sexually moaned at and groaned at, and I ask them, when did you start being subjected to these behaviours? And some go back to grade 2 and grade 3. The same boys are doing it, right? So it's not helping or serving the boys to allow them to walk around groaning, grunting, moaning, making these sexual noises at girls. How does it help them to be prepared for life? If they did this in their workplace, they'd probably lose their jobs. So why are we allowing it? And to have to keep hearing boys will be boys. I was hearing that growing up in the 70s, for God's sake, and I'm still hearing it now. What were the boys? Were the boys missing when the consciences were handed out? Like, why do we expect a lower standard from boys? Don't we expect higher from boys? What's going to set them up and help them to flourish in life, rather than allowing them to behave like, Neanderthals and cavemen at school? I take the point from Keith here about the role of the manosphere and the Andrew Tates, etc. And eSafety has just produced a report on this. Also, Jen from Not My Kid had a comment about the role of parents. Yes, of course, parents have to step up to the plate. Of course, parents have to be across the tech and monitor their kids' media use. There's a campaign now to increase age of access to 16. I see merit in that. But you know what? It's not a fair fight. I talk to good parents doing all the right things at home. Their child was exposed at school, on the school bus, at the friend's sleepover, at the school camp. We cannot be with our children 24/7. Parents are up against a multi-billion-dollar predatory porn industry, which is preying on our boys, dropping porn into their chats, into their gaming rooms, into their gaming sites, deliberately grooming boys to become porn consumers because that's their business model. They have to do that. So of course parents need to do all they can to protect their child, but it is not a fair fight, and we need our governments and our regulatory bodies to step up and put the well-being of children before the vested interests of the global sex industry.
I can say, I have 3 boys aged 16 to 21, and I've seen since, you know, the 21-year-old has grown up, you know, what's the acceleration of this, you know,
Yes.
the social and technological changes, even in this, so the difference between when he was 16 and my 16-year-old now, and what they both, you know, what the 21-year-old experienced, what the 16-year-old is experiencing, and he tells me it's constant on his, it just popping up on his feed, on his, it's absolutely, you know. So I think, you know, Melinda's right, but, you know, the other thing I would say is, and also going back to Jen, it's really important that we all understand what our role is, and to take a sort of, I guess, an empowered sort of approach or to this, to think we can do something. We are up against it, the biggest Department of Education in the world, as Melinda says, but we need to also feel like there is something we can do to make a difference. We can't fix it by ourselves. No one can, but there is something that each of us can do to make a difference. Parents, teachers, advocates, lawyers, practitioners, everyone in this space. And, you know, having worked for quite a while in, you know, in law reform and policy reform and understanding the workings of governments and the machinery for legislative change, I would just urge everyone not to wait. We do need that change that Melinda's talking about. Absolutely, we do. And we do have those frameworks around adult perpetrated abuse, and they're very helpful. But I think we shouldn't wait for laws and governments to fix this. I think all of us should begin to sort of understand what it is that we can do and that we should do ourselves to you know, educate the young people in our lives, the children and young people in our lives, to talk with the schools where our children or the children we know are attending about their approach and what they're doing, and you know, going back to that old-fashioned concept of it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes all of us to safeguard children.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's, I know it's a multifaceted issue, right? I don't think anyone, like, person or whatever can solve this issue. I really, without getting into a political debate, I don't believe that having the age of consent or whatever it is to 16, not help me out here, changing the age for social media to 16.
Access.
Yes, thank you. Goodness, my brain just went a bit blank.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to solve any problems, right? I really think it comes down to being proactive, because if kids are going to do this, they're going to do it. So you might as well teach them how to do it in a safe way and get information from the right place. I mean, children who know, there's already an age on there. There's already, you know, strict guidelines, which are not obviously made accountable. They're not checking these.
Yeah, they're not strict. They're not enforced. The big tech companies don't care. But Kelly, this might be our first point of difference tonight. So the data on this is really solid about social media harms to young people. In fact, Jonathan Haidt has gathered the global data in a book called The Anxious Generation, which I have just down here next to me, but I won't leave the screen to grab it. But he's collated all the global data on the rise in mental health problems, depression, anxiety, self-harm in girls through the roof, 189% increase in self-harm in girls in the 10 to 14 year age bracket since 2009, when we introduced social media and smartphones. And every year of delay has a protective benefit on our young people. They have an extra year of maturity, of cognitive development, less bullying, less trolling, less exposure to pro-eating disorder sites and pages, the whole thinspo, fitspo influence, the influence of so-called influencers, which is toxic to our girls' welfare and well-being. I think there is a case for it. Having said that, you know, the big tech platforms show zero social responsibility. So Whether they enforce it or not is another thing. They don't enforce the age of 13. But I do think there's a case to be made for delay, and that's been reflected in the global data on the declining well-being of our young people. So we are actually supporting that. Collective Shut is actually supporting that campaign.
I guess the thing I think about, and I didn't really have an opinion so much as, they're going to do it anyway without accountability. And I think that's the key part. If social media companies aren't going to be accountable to enforcing some sort of regulation, how is there going to be any consequence for?
But we don't argue they're going to do it anyway when it comes to other harmful practices. We still regulate, we still do what we can to protect our children from things that are harmful to them, such as alcohol, such as smoking, etc. So I think there is a case to be made for delay. The fact is our children aren't getting outside enough. They're not getting enough outdoor play. They're stuck to their screens, as many of us are. It's not just about our kids, but it shows it's impairing their function at school, their functionality. I remember speaking to a principal who told me that he introduced to their school, he said it was the best educational intervention he'd ever made. He introduced the Yonder locking magnetic pocket, where all the young people in his state school had to put their phones in this locking pocket at the start of the day, and they couldn't get it out till the end of the day. He said they noticed 3 things immediately: 1, less bullying in the school; 2, less vandalism; and 3, he said, for the first time in years, noise from the playground. The kids weren't playing. Now they were playing. And I thought that was a very profound account of the impact of giving your kids a break from it. The screen time is excessive. It's harmful to them. They're not able to read a book or focus. Teachers tell me all the time they're so distracted by their phones. They're sneaking them into classrooms. Often they have a separate phone hidden somewhere else. They're lying to their parents about it. And, I think as parents, we're supposed to protect our kids and give them some more tech-free time for their well-being.
Do you think that the social media, and I often think this, social media is responsible for the fact that I think a lot of these young people just can't have a confronting conversation, or can't have a conversation about relationships, or can't really talk about emotional intelligence and those types of things. I think is like really different compared to maybe because I went through a whole generation of students when I was a school-based police officer. So I watched these kids from grade 7 all the way through to grade 12, and even in that 6 years, watching the difference between when they started and when they finished, I was just amazed, because even the transition in social media and apps and things that they were being confronted with, I could see the change in these kids, and I couldn't have a conversation with them that say, this is how I'm feeling about this. Like, you'd really have to tease it out, and to do that you'd have to build a rapport with them first for them even to open up about some of this stuff. But just to extract some of those really vulnerable things from them was quite difficult.
Very difficult. Yeah, teachers are saying that they're less emotionally resilient, less able to regulate their emotional states, get distressed more easily, unable to have difficult conversations, unable to argue in a healthy way. There's more tribalism, more sort of identity politics. There's also more verbal violence and physical violence. So another phenomenon we're seeing now is the rise of student-on-student fight videos. And what you notice when you watch the student-on-student fight videos, including girl-on-girl fight videos, is that no one intervenes. They all stand around and live stream it to their friends because they wouldn't want their friends to miss out. It's entertainment, and then they move on to, the next trending video, but no one actually intervenes. And what does this mean for us as a civilization if we don't have any empathy, if we can't enter into the suffering of a person? And social media has played a role in that. If you listen to Frances Haugen speak, the Facebook whistleblower, she says they knew that Facebook was damaging the mental health of young people. They knew a long time ago. Meta knew, and they covered up the data. They hid it. They didn't want it known, and they didn't actually care. So, we listen to someone like Frances Haugen about big tech's lack of social responsibility towards vulnerable young people. It's a pretty compelling evidence.
And I suppose, like, from that, what I get from that is short tempers, unable to communicate, explosive domestic violence, and
Yes,
high risk behaviours in complex and traumatic relationships, which means those
more trauma, more suffering.
So it does kind of make a lot more sense when you start to pull this apart a little bit as to how damaging this culture is, really.
Yep.
The Australian Child Maltreatment Study, expressed this very some writing, by the researchers since that study come out. It's recently published work. They've expressed very clearly their view that as a society we have never done enough to ensure the healthy sexual and emotional development of young men, of boys. And that's especially concerning as it is young men, or most child sexual abuse is inflicted by males. But they also point to the fact that the toll of this neglect, they call it neglect, and it is our neglect, is accelerated, and it's accelerating and exacerbated by social and technological challenges that we're facing. So I think it's always been a problem. It hasn't come out of nowhere, but it's being accelerated by social media, through social media.
Yeah.
And so I think, so we do need to look at how we manage that. And the other thing, I think that Jonathan Haidt says, and other people before him have said, is that we have been quite assiduous in regulating the physical environment for children, but we have not regulated the digital environment, for children in the same way. Children cannot walk into a pub, but they can walk into what is basically a brothel online, so that speaks to the need for really, regulatory frameworks to grapple with this, as well as, personal responsibility. We want parents to take responsibility. We want children and young people to learn to do the right thing, but at the end of the day, this does require, a sort of a structural approach. It requires clarity for everybody about the rules, and that includes big tech as well. And I mean, I agree, with the concerns that have been expressed by a lot of people, Melinda, very clearly. I think big tech has got a lot to, and I use that phrase. I know it's like a cliche, and we're talking about some nebulous, vague thing out there, big tech, but we are actually talking about corporate entities that are they're clear, identifiable corporate entities that are operating in this space for profit.
That's right. So there's 32 companies advertising undressing and nudifying apps on social media. 32 companies that have created undressing apps that undress girls in seconds, and they only work on the bodies of women and girls. Just to throw in a quick example there. That's harmful. Why aren't they banned?
Yeah. I consider myself somebody to be fairly aware, and being a school-based police officer for so long, I've seen so many problems with apps and harmful sexual behaviors, and children trying to express themselves in some way, shape or form. But I'm very grateful to have this conversation, because I feel like my eyes have been opened even more, as if they could be opened even more from the space I work in, for crying out loud. But as equally positive, like, to get some idea on the scope of this is equally tragic, because it's really scaring me to think about what Maha, when we were in Melbourne, we were talking about incarceration of young people. Like, I'm thinking, like, what's going to happen to these young people if they don't know that what they're doing is wrong?
We don't want that.
Arrested, they're going to get locked up because they're their behaviour is so normalised, and they're going to end up in these situations without intervention. There's going to be some massive problems. Like, we are on the back foot here. Like, we're really on the back foot.
Yeah.
This reactive shit's got to stop. There needs to be some proactive measures here. Come on.
Yes, and look, apart from the potential criminalisation of children and young people, institutions where these incidents are occurring, like in school environments, schools are going to face more and more, cases of civil claims, damages. We had a case that was handed down in New South Wales just in April, where a 13-year-old intellectually disabled student was groomed and then sexually assaulted by an older student. And the judge found, there was prior knowledge and foreseeability of harm. The school had prior knowledge. They should have foreseen that harm would occur. And they had some warning signs. They didn't take reasonable precautions. So they're liable. But that's one side of it, the civil liability. The other side of it is, as Melinda mentioned, in New South Wales, it is failing to report child abuse is in itself an offence. And the definition under crimes legislation in New South Wales, the child abuse offence includes sexual harassment, stalking, those types of incidents that happen at schools. So it's a really serious problem with implications for everyone, not just the direct victim, for the child engaging in the behaviour and the institutions that are involved as well.
I think it would be really helpful with the level of more accountability for schools just on reporting, so that we can actually really much more accurately capture the state of what's going on, because I feel like without actually knowing and identifying these problems and not reporting on them, how can we possibly know what we're dealing with without that level of accountability in schools and reporting? Because it's not seen as harmful sexual behaviours. It might be considered bullying. I can see the blanket terms that would be used, as opposed to going, well, actually, it's trafficking. This is something I am quite passionate about, so missing kids in care, doing harmful sexual behaviours in order to have a roof over their heads, and you're aware of it, but it's called something else. It's called couch surfing, or it's called, so the mislabel is really setting, I think, schools and organisations up to fail young people because of a lack of information and education that actually helps us to identify what the real issues are. And I think that's a really big piece of work that needs to be done, just in order to accurately report what's really sort of happening out there. So
I think that's right. That's right. There is a problem with the data collection for harmful sexual behaviours, absolutely. And also with the recognition of it, as you say. I mean, what used to be good old-fashioned bullying is really now sexualized bullying. Good old-fashioned racism that I experienced as a youngster. The girls who with backgrounds like mine now are going to get, the racism with a nice layer of, sexual sort of sexualized bullying on top of that, which is really offensive. It seems to be fairly all pervasive in that sense.
Yes,
it's the pornification of our culture.
The Lebanese girls tell me they all get called Mia Khalifa every day. Mia Khalifa is a well-known porn star. If the girl is Lebanese and wears black-rimmed glasses, she takes them off because Mia Khalifa has black-rimmed glasses. They have to endure being called this name every day at school. So,
so I think, the difference is, I guess, when we were growing up, and the boys who were our peers, there was still, of course, there was still harmful sexual behaviour, taking place. But what you're describing, Melinda, the boys who were our peers, if they wanted to consume porn, it wasn't readily and easily available. They couldn't just, So I think now that sort of, it's absolutely pervasive. It's everywhere. It means that we need to start being realistic now about how that is translating into the everyday lives of children and people.
Well, I've learned, speaking in schools, to my surprise, that while many schools have sexual harassment policies, they exist teacher to teacher or teacher to student. They don't exist student to student or student to teacher. That's a big missing piece.
Wow.
There should be a uniform policies on this so that schools are clear, sexual harassment, student to student, student to teacher should be a no-brainer, you would think, with the evidence that we do have of sexual harassment from students in schools. And often there's a lack of clear policies and procedures. I run sessions with educators where I'll go through some case studies and I'll ask, what do you do if you hear the sexual groaning, grunting, moaning noises? And there's a lack of clarity about what should happen with that. Do you call the boy into the office after school? Do you call the parents? Do you call the police? Is it head of year? Is it head of school? Is it OH&S? Is it the education department? And I've yet to come across a school where there's a clear sort of procedure to follow, a clear sort of chain of command, key understandings of what you do with these behaviours. I think that's a big missing piece as well.
I think, some schools will have that to a greater degree than others, but it's certainly not consistent, and that's what we need to have. I see Keith Corbeen's there commenting that there needs to be more done at more education at a school level. That's absolutely right. So that's something that I think schools are taking on board. That they know now that this is a matter of public interest. It is as well, and concern. And I feel for school leaders. I do, because I think it's a really hard problem to grapple with. And I think that in the main, the school leaders who are out there are wanting. They're not thinking that they don't care. They do want to deal with the situation, but we need to have greater clarity in how we approach it.
I know we're finishing up, but can I tell a quick good story?
Yeah,
I had a principal in Maitland, Newcastle, 3 weeks ago, heard what the girls were saying, heard me speak at his school all day, stood up before the girls and pledged to change the culture at the school, apologised for how the girls were being treated, listened to the girls, respected to them, and pledged, head of school pledged in front of all the girls that he would do everything he could to change the culture at his school, that he would not tolerate harmful sexual behaviours, he wouldn't tolerate the sexual harassment, the threats, the rape threats for nudes, the dick pics, girls' mothers being called MILFs, for example, the groaning, the moaning, the circulation of porn on the school bus. And he pledged before those girls to change the culture at his school. And that principal, I commend him, he gave me hope that day. And that could perhaps have a flow-on effect and change the culture in all our school, which would then have a flow-on effect to the community and the world.
Well,
so that was a kind of hope.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I was just going to ask, we still do have a couple of minutes, but I would like to, if you could just give maybe a couple of points for perhaps parents, I think, because there's a lot that schools can do, but obviously that's comes down to a framework and a response that's coordinated. But if talking to parents, like what do you think might be some of the key things that they could do to potentially, help their young person in this space?
Well, I'll actually be speaking to parents tomorrow night here in Melbourne, where I'm visiting at the moment. I'm going to be giving a parent community talk tomorrow night at a school in Lilydale, and I'll be urging parents to act personally and act collectively. Act personally. Obviously, what are you modelling at home? What does your relationship look like? How do you talk to each other? What behaviours do you put up within the home? What do you tolerate? Are boys allowed to make cruel comments about girls' bodies? Are girls judging their bodies for how they look. Is mum saying, does my bum look big in this? How do we all behave as a family? Do we tolerate the violent music, the violent games? What are we allowing in the house? Are we allowing kids behind closed doors with internet-enabled devices full of porn and predators? What do you think's going to happen? How's that going to work out? And then what can we do collectively? How can we act politically? Well, obviously, I'm going to say join Collective Shout, collectiveshout.org. It's free. We need you. We're a grassroots campaigning movement against everything we've been talking about here tonight. And it's too hard for individual parents on their own. It takes a village, as Maha has said. And we run campaigns. Last year, we had 23 victories. This year, we've had 15 so far. One of those was getting the government to reverse its decision not to run an age verification pilot in this country. So there's power in the collective voice. We're working towards social change, cultural transformation. So yeah, acting personally and acting collectively, speaking out, saying this is unacceptable to us as parents, as a community, as a society. What do we really want for our young people? What kind of world do we want to create for them? And we'd love your listeners to get on board and work with us for this change we all desperately need to see.
And
Thank you. Maha, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with all of the above, especially with joining Collective Shout. Yes, do that. But I'd also add that, parents talk to your young people. At the Royal Commission, one of the things we saw often, the children who were most vulnerable to abuse by adult perpetrators, one of the things that was pretty often the case was that they were not talking with their own families, their parents. So that protective factor wasn't there. I think it's going to be not too dissimilar in this situation as well. If you're speaking with your child, young person, that is an extra protective factor.
Mm-hmm.
So keep open dialogue, ask them, engage with them about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we need safe people. That's one of the things I advocate heavily for is tribe when I'm talking to my listeners, and that's about having safe people, safe places, safe environment to be able to have these really powerful discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And I also believe it's singly the most protective mechanism that you can have in relation to child sexual abuse. It's just being able to have a safe adult that you can have conversations with, because trying to find that information or get help from other places doesn't always work. So we do need those people in our network. So just really quickly, ladies, I just want to say thank you so much to anyone who's out there listening. We will be back in a fortnight's time. I've got these two amazing ladies again. We're going to continue this conversation along the thread of sextortion, because it is such an issue with our young men being so vulnerable, and the grooming and the coercion that exists in that space is so heavy. There's not really a lot of education around how to understand or pull that apart or deal with it, let alone actually respond to it organizationally. So we'll be talking about that, and probably based on this conversation and any comments, we'll probably address those as well. Fantastic. Thank you both so much.
Pleasure.
For those of you listening, if any of the content was triggering, please make sure you head to my website at kellyhumphreys.com. There are support numbers there. I also, if you are listening, I do have a free book, Reclaim Your Freedom, 8 cycle breaking strategies for survivors of child sexual abuse. I just received the most beautiful feedback from somebody today. I don't get a lot of time to chase people and advertise or promote my books. I'll get there, I promise. But I just had the most beautiful feedback about that little free ebook and how empowering and wonderful it was for this particular victim and survivor. So please have a read. I would love you to do that. I would love you to come back next week. Please let me know if there's anything you would like to hear, see, a guest you would recommend. But thank you so much. Thank you, Maha. Thank you, Melinda. And we will see you again.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks so much for your interest and for having us tonight.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to the great audience. Fantastic comments throughout. Thank you.